And I've been told this growing up plenty of times. There's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. When I hear that, my first reaction is I want to punch that person in the throat because I was one.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. In each episode, an atheist or agnostic shares their story of deconversion from Christianity. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
My guest today grew up never knowing any other perspective except the one he was told to have. His family did not attend events outside of church. He spent preschool through 12th grade at the same private school and church. His friendships were strictly controlled, girlfriends or crushes were prohibited, and every potential influence was censored. He had no privacy at any time. He was not allowed to develop his own opinions unless it was the same as his parents'. He was forced to hide his opinions, thoughts, friendships, music, and anything else that did not conform. His worldview had been dictated to him his whole life until, through the Army ROTC program at a Fundamentalist Christian college, he began to discover the real world. He now considers himself an atheist. He's married with 2 kids and lives in the South. I'd like to welcome Eric to the podcast. Eric, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. All right, so lately, something I've been asking my guests first thing is, now that you're not a Christian, what do you do on Sundays? How do you like to spend your Sundays?
Sundays is more or less family day. If I didn't get to mow the lawn on Saturday, I mow the lawn on Sunday and hang out with the kiddos and the wife, maybe go do something or nothing.
Yeah,
Really
or
nice.
nothing. Yeah, that's what we do a lot of times too. Yeah. All right. Well, let's start with kind of your Christian origins, the beginning of your story. Tell me in what ways, and I know there's a lot here because I've kind of looked at, we talked a little bit about your background, but in what ways did Christianity influence you as you were a child?
So Christianity was the entirety of my reality as a child. Up until I was in my late teens, early 20s, while at college. My parents, when they moved to the part in Ohio where I grew up, they had found the church that they enjoyed and the community they enjoyed being with, farm country, and that's where I began attending preschool at the school attached to that same church. And that's where I ended up graduating high school from. So that church school, those same buildings, some of which I helped pour concrete and construct as a teenager, that was it. Home, church,
life.
school, and back.
Wow. A couple things that stood out to me when you sent me some of the information about your background was that you were viewed as rebellious growing up. That seems to be a big theme. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So my parents, and I think it's the language. I think it's the language that they were told to use. And I don't harbor much ill will against my parents because I think genuinely they were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. Yeah. So when I didn't conform or behave, in the opposite order, because it's hard for a little kid to really conform. But when I didn't behave, the only thing they knew to think was, well, I had a rebellious heart or rebellious spirit. So the influences that they would have had would have been Gothard, Dobson, the Pearls with their book, which is an absolutely awful book. Yeah, To Train Up a Child by Michael and Debbie Pearl. There it is.
Okay.
And I've gone back and actually read the book as an adult.
Oh, wow.
And it's, the perfect example in that book, which was something that I think my parents more or less took to heart,
Yeah.
was he tells a story in this book about him training a dog. And it was a smaller dog. And he uses this story of the dog kept jumping on the bed or something when him and his wife were trying to sleep. And he pretty much just beat the dog until it stopped.
Wow.
And he used that as an analogy for your children, that you had to break their spirit. I think that's an actual quote from the book. You have to break their spirit. And because you are bigger, stronger, smarter than them, you need to use whatever means necessary. And of course, he backed it up with Bible verses and whatnot.
Right.
His Proverbs,
The rod.
that whole
rod.
line of thinking, right? So that genuinely colored most of my early childhood. I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned being spanked like every day.
I was in high. Our memories are always colored by stuff, but
Yeah.
So not having a firm memory of those early days, I feel like I was spanked every day.
Yeah.
It's probably every
Like a
other
lot.
day. I don't know, but I was spanked
Yeah.
a lot. I do know for the entirety of third grade, I was spanked at least once a day. Most days was twice.
That's insane.
And in the tradition, you get as many swats as years old.
Wow.
So they weren't abusing me. I don't really get that across. Like it wasn't
Okay.
a belt. It wasn't a switch.
It wasn't like they lost control in the moment or something.
No,
Yeah, it was
no,
more
it was
controlled.
very deliberate. And my mom had these little oven shovels that were about the size of the palm of your hand.
Okay.
And it was as she called it, a perfect two cheek thing, and it's real light wood. So it was more of a stinging thing. Like there's no bruise.
Yeah.
But still, you get spanked every day. As a third grader,
That's a lot.
and that was probably the point that I developed. That whole year was probably when I developed most of what they would consider the most rebellious or stubborn attitude that they weren't fans of throughout my time with them until I left when I was 18.
Okay, so you're about 9 years old or so, somewhere in there.
Because you have to put your head down and survive. Like with that, there was a complication with the teacher at the Christian school. She was young, she was inexperienced. Everything was my fault. I remember a time where we were doing a math quiz or something, and I kept getting the same answer. I go up, I turn it in to the teacher. She'd mark that one wrong, send me back to my desk. I'd do it again, same answer. Go back up, and she got really frustrated with me after 4 or 5 return trips. And I remember her pulling out she grabs her pen and she starts working it out. She's like, "See, do this, and then she comes up with my answer. And then she does it again.
Oh.
And then she's like, "Oh, the book was wrong." And there was no apology, there was no nothing. And I got in trouble. I got in trouble that night and got spanked because I questioned her authority.
Oh.
I mean, I remember that specifically. That was, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of my childhood. In that, I went into survival mode. I kept everything to myself. I do that summer. They were spanking me so much, even they recognized it was becoming excessive, and they moved on for at least a time to grounding me from things like okay, spanking's not working, we have to do other stuff. So I'm now grounded from playing summer baseball, which really wasn't all that heartbreaking for me because I'm terrible at baseball. I could strike out at slow pitch softball. In fact, I did church league. I'm not good at it. No, I'm willing to admit I'm not good. I'm fast. I was very fast as a kid. So
yeah.
And this might be one of the biggest impacts on my life path potentially. I'll never know because I was so young, but I was good at riding BMX. And I'm not talking like just I'm remembering myself being good. No, there's still stuff I could do when I was in second, third grade that I can't do now as an adult on a bike. And they grounded me from my bike for the entirety of the summer. Like it was chained to the post, holding up the window AC unit. And when I got back on my bike the next school year when I was ungrounded, I was so devastated because I guess I was still at that point in development where the stuff that I'd been able to do after not being able to touch pedals for 3 months, I kind of lost a lot of that.
Yeah.
But after third grade, the spankings, they tapered back off because I think my mom credits my fourth grade teacher for quote unquote saving me, but still doesn't admit necessarily any wrongdoing. She kind of puts it on both the teachers instead of, well, maybe you should have within reason stood up for your kid or looked into it a little bit. Like, why is he getting in trouble so much? Or, why is he not getting decent grades, A's and B's? Why is he catching some C's? Like, what's actually going on here? Not just,
if he got punished, they're trusting the authority.
Right. And then through late elementary school, middle school, it was business as usual. I remember dreading weekends, holidays, summer break, because school was no fun. I'm still not a big fan of school, but being at home was worse. Always
it's a stressful life to be going to school. You don't love school, but when school's over, it gets worse. Yeah. That's tough. Yeah.
And sometime between third and fourth grade, my parents, so they both graduated from Bob Jones University.
Okay. That's a big, that makes sense.
Yes.
I've heard of Bob Jones, yeah.
I think the gentleman at the time was a teacher there, but he moved up in the organization, and I'll name him because he's a human piece of shit, and he should be in jail right now.
Oh wow.
For what he did to sexual assault and abuse victims.
Wow.
But his name is Greg Mazak. I suppose you could call him a doctor because he does have a PhD from Bob Jones, but that really doesn't count. But Greg Mazak, he convinced my parents that children should not go to sleepovers.
Should not go to sleep early?
Sleepovers.
Oh, sorry. Sleepovers.
Like when you go to your friend, your birthday, Friday after school, Troy's mom picks up all the boys and then they go to Troy's house, go sleepovers. And his reasoning was, if I put it in simple terms, was every father is a child abuser or a potential child abuser.
Wow.
So you can't trust anybody, nobody, because if you let your kids go to sleepovers, the odds are that they will be sexually abused at some point in their childhood. So
that's crazy.
And with that, I remember them sitting all those kids down, and we're all I've four. Well, there's four of us kids, and we're all about 4 years apart. So at the time, let's pretend I was 10. So my next sibling was 6, and then 2. So really, it was my 6-year-old sibling and myself. And they explained to us this is why it's dangerous. I can't remember what words they used, but they assured us that this wasn't going to impact us going to friends' houses. That they would let us go to the beginning of the sleepover, and then they'd come pick us up around midnight or so. And take us back. And that sleepover rule also applied to church lock-ins, apparently, because nothing good, and this is a Mazak thing, nothing good happens after midnight. But that never happened. They were always, it was either too tired or too inconvenient, too far away, whatever. So at 10, between 9 and 11 years old, my social life literally went from church and school friends to in being able to hang out with them outside of that campus to being just there. There was nobody else. I could ride my bike around town, regular check-ins as a kid. Very small town, like 600 people, stoplight and a 4-way stop.
Wow.
I could still draw the whole. Yeah, I could still draw the whole town on a napkin if I wanted to. But I knew kids there that, you know, our little BMX posse that we rolled around with. But that was the end of my social life, period, ever.
So it wasn't just that they were preventing you from going to friends' houses for overnight stuff. You never really got to go see other friends at their houses.
It kind of moved into that. It moved into that as well. Like I was explicitly forbidden from going to any of my little biking friends' houses in the neighborhood because, you know, my parents didn't know them, or they listened to music that was worldly or ungodly, or laundry list of reasons that I couldn't go to their houses. Like they were willing to accept us, you know, building dirt jumps and stuff like that. But beyond that, there was nothing else allowed. Even my friend that lived directly behind my house, you couldn't do that.
So it really prevented you from having friends as a child, like
correct,
good friends. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
And then the nature of a small Christian school, as well, that didn't help either. That's not necessarily my parents' fault. It's a matter of, by the time I got to high school, I was in a class of 5, and I was the only guy. The class above me had one person in it, and that was a girl, and the class below me had one person in it, and that was a guy.
Wow. So incredibly small circle of, like, I don't know, peers.
Potential friends.
Yeah.
Yep.
Potential friends. Yeah.
And I'd made, I started working when I was 14. I was lifeguard full-time, or when I was 15 years old. And then moved on to, honestly, still to this day, my favorite job. I worked at Pizza Hut.
Oh, yeah.
Back when we still had a buffet, back in the good old days. And then McDonald's following that, because it was close to school, so I could work before soccer practice and then go to soccer practice. I was a guy that came in for 2 or 3 hours and let everybody have a lunch break. So I'd made friends there. And especially at the Pizza Hut, I would, so Friday, Saturday nights obviously are very busy for the pizza industry. So there was genuinely nights where, you know, we'd be in the back doing dishes or cleaning until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow.
But there were some also that we weren't. So I figured out pretty quick that once the pattern was set, where I was genuinely working, my parents never looked at my paycheck, that I would go, and for anybody else who grew up in the rural Midwest, you know what I'm talking about. The only place to go hang out after midnight, if you weren't getting into deep trouble, was the Walmart parking lot. So we'd go around the corner, and we'd ride up to the Walmart parking lot, and we'd sit there until about 1:30, 2 o'clock, and then I would head home. And I got busted doing that, and it was the end of the world as far as my parents were concerned. Wow. I had never done any drugs. I'd never smoked weed. I'd never had a sip of alcohol. We weren't. There wasn't somebody with a VW camper that we were banging out in the back of. There was none of that. We were just sitting on the trunks of cars. I don't know, talking about life, universe, and everything.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I had to quit that job.
Do you think they were well intentioned and they were trying to follow what they had been taught, or do you think it was a bit of like they were kind of controlling also, and this was kind of they were using the the religious teachings of Bob Jones University or the church that they're at to try to keep their kids controlled?
No, I can say this in hindsight because I've seen my other three siblings. I've seen them grow up. And being the oldest is always tough, and you can't. The first kid for new parents, especially however then they had me 20, 24, 25 respectively. I get it. You don't know everything. You make mistakes. I know I'm going to make mistakes with my kids, but I think it was they were trying to be controlling because they had it in their head. I can't remember what the Bible verse is, but it's the one where it's like, if you lead a child up in the way he should go, they will never depart from it.
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist, I think.
So they were trying to keep me on that straight and narrow path, because in their mind, if I didn't stray from it or couldn't stray from it, then once I got out of the house, I would have been. They wouldn't have put it this way, but now it was. I would have been indoctrinated, brainwashed, or whatever you want to call it, enough to where I would carry on that path because I knew nothing else.
Yeah. It's like they try to train you, and it's like a protection, they try to
call it
train
molding you.
Yeah. And so that when you go out there, you've got enough of the teachings in you that you're not going to stray. Yeah.
Correct. And so I think that was most of their motivation.
So it was well intentioned.
I think it was in their mind, yes.
Yeah.
I like I said, I don't think they were trying to be nasty or mean or anything.
So some other stuff that you mentioned was you loved music. So playing the guitar wasn't an option. And then something that kind of stood out to me was that you got in trouble for having, did you have a Third Day CD or?
Yes, I had Third Day Wire. Is it called Wire or Wired? Still a good CD.
I don't remember. Yeah.
I had a Sonic Flood. I don't remember the name of the album.
That's funny, yeah. I had that one.
And I had A Beautiful Letdown by Switchfoot.
Yeah, those were some popular bands back in the day.
Oh, back in the day. Oh, yeah, that's when... that was Beautiful Letdown just come out. That was a great album.
Yeah, that was like the 90s, like the late 90s maybe. Those bands?
Yeah,
maybe
late
early
90s,
2000s.
early 2000s,
yep. Yeah.
So I had become in high school very good at hiding things, both mentally and physically. As in, I made a false pocket in one of my duffel bags and then put cardboard in it so that you wouldn't see the imprint of CDs. In my car, which was a 89 Nissan Sentra, the 5-speed, I had cut one of the seams on the upholstery on the back of the driver's seat and then put Velcro in it because I could get a CD player and a pack, like those single stack zip-ups CD holders. I could get that in there between the springs.
That's
so you
funny.
couldn't feel it sitting down and you wouldn't notice the seam on the back.
You learned some amazing life skills.
Yes, I did.
That's kind of awesome.
Everybody decided to become a drug runner.
You're set.
I'll be all right, as long as there's no dogs.
Right, exactly.
But my dad threatened to kick me out of the house at the age of 15 because he found those 3 CDs. Like, he was dead serious.
Yeah.
If I ever find you doing this stuff again, you will have to find somewhere else to live.
Wow, that's so crazy. It's
Um,
so severe, for such
well,
small things.
well, yes.
Yeah.
Like according to my parents in the church I was raised in, any music that wasn't or that was a modern derivative was inherently evil. Like there was no specific standard. There was no real date range. It was more like merely if a song had a syncopated rhythm. This was considered quote unquote unbiblical. And biblical music was supposed to be composed with the emphasis in the following order. And this was taught frequently at the school anyways. You had to have melody as the primary part, and then harmony as a secondary part, and then last was the rhythm. Because all music has a rhythm, but if the rhythm had any emphasis to it other than just the nature of the composition, it was ungodly or it was worldly. And the trouble for me was that I had been assured up to that point that all my parents' decisions and standards came from the Bible, directly from the Bible and what it taught. And as a teenager, I wanted to listen to the music that was popular at the time, or at least of the same popular genre. that was the heyday of contemporary Christian music,
Yeah.
copying bands. So I in my own head, as a Christian at the time, I was like, oh yeah, I can't listen to the worldly stuff. There was a Christian band called Bleach, and Bleach
Oh,
was a
yeah.
direct rip off of Smashing Pumpkins.
That's so interesting. I had
Direct
a
rip.
Bleach CD, or my roommate did, or something. Yeah.
So, I wanted to listen to Bleach because, it sounded like a song I heard on the radio or a band I could hear on the
Yeah,
radio.
and the sound you liked.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I asked my dad at one point for the specific Bible verse, chapter verse for the justifications, their only answer was a combination of, well, there are principles in the Bible. And, I would obviously ask, well, where? Show me where. Because I'm supposed to follow
Yeah.
this book. Show me where these principles are. So at least now that I'll have it in my head, I can look back at that and say,
Yeah.
I shouldn't listen to Stephen Curtis Chapman because there's, he records with a drum set. But I could point to this verse in the Bible and go, yeah, that's right. I can't do that.
Yeah, you're trying
And
to
then
understand the reasoning behind the rule.
and then it moved on to, well, we have convictions, or the Holy Spirit has convicted us, despite not having any justification for it. They didn't say that part, but you get
Yeah.
the idea.
But yeah, that's a common Christian response.
But this caused a challenge for me because the Bible didn't prohibit syncopated rhythm. It didn't prohibit synthetic sounds. Of course, I wouldn't have known what that was. Like even plugging in an acoustic guitar was too far
That's crazy.
for my family. A guitar was borderline. That was walking the knife edge of being too worldly.
Wow.
Um,
So you playing guitar was out of the question, essentially.
it wasn't necessarily out of the question. It was they couldn't. Well, there's the one guy in Genesis that mentioned he's credited in Christian circles with inventing music or instruments or something like that. But one of the things I think he invented was a stringed instrument, or what he's credited with. So,
Okay.
well, a guitar has strings, so that it's that one's specifically mentioned in
Must
the
be
Bible.
guitar.
Right. But things like the Bible didn't prohibit dancing. I wasn't allowed to dance. Dancing was wholly out of the question. But and I agree. The Bible, like, well, the dancing's encouraged in places.
Yeah.
Like you can look at the story of the Israelites worshiping Baal, and they're dancing. But yeah, obviously that was not good dancing because they're worshiping an idol. But then you look at other parts where I don't know, King David does something awesome, or God blesses him and he throws a party.
Yeah.
Where
Or
they're
like
out there
dances
dancing.
in the Lord's presence or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So that didn't make sense. And And as more and more things came up, being a teenager, which I'm fairly certain most of us at some point in our teenage tenure were shitheads, but we've got it figured out, right?
Yeah.
The whole world is figured out, and with that in mind, all these things that couldn't be justified started to erode my confidence in authority in general. And there are reasons of because I said so or respect your authority, or respect, the Cartman respect my authority. That started
Exactly.
that wasn't good enough anymore for me.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's good. Like that's like the natural progression. Like that's what we all go through. When we get to that age, we start wanting to understand the reasons behind things. Yeah.
I think the difference maybe in mine was I wasn't allowed to look for answers.
Okay.
I wasn't allowed to understand things.
So it had gotten to a point where you were like starting to, maybe it was bothering you enough that you were starting to like push back a little bit. Is that fair to say,
Correct,
or not
because
really
they
pushing
would,
back?
They
Yeah.
would. Oh, I was pushing back,
Yeah.
but they would say because I said so should be a good enough answer. In my opinion now, as at least pretending to be a grown-up, and now that I have kids, my wife and I have talked about this, we want to teach our kids to challenge our authority within the concept of time and play, or with time and place, but we want them to challenge our authority. We want to instill a whole bunch of other things, critical thinking and all that other stuff. But
Sure.
and it's for the express reason because the answer because I said so or because I don't want you to, that isn't good enough. In any other circumstance that you have in life, that is not a good enough answer.
Right.
Now it might be for the time, but at the end, that's not a good enough answer.
Yeah.
So I want my child to be able to come up to me as a preteen, a middle schooler, or a high schooler, and the example I would use is like, mom and dad have some friends over. We're hanging out on the back porch, and we've had a few too many drinks, and I don't feel like being bothered. And kiddo comes out and says, "Hey, I want to go to a friend's house tonight. We're going to sleep over. This person's driving me. I'm going to stay there at this house, and then I'll get the same person is going to bring me home. We're going to stay there the whole time." And I just offhand just say, no, I don't want you to go because I don't feel like being bothered with thinking about it.
Right. Right.
I want that moment for my kid to circle back and be like, "Hey, Dad, can I talk to you about this? Or can you come inside?" And then be like, "Hey, can you explain why?" Like, I want that because then I have to look and go, "Well, I really don't have a good answer, do I?"
Yeah, I've actually had those exact moments where I've had to be like, "Yeah, I guess it's not a big deal. I really."
That's on me,
I just
right?
didn't want to be bothered. Yeah.
They're not
Totally. Yeah, and that's good because you're willing to have the conversation with them. You're teaching them that they can be respectful to authority, but also question authority, and it's a give and take. I mean, that's a really good life lesson. Sometimes even good people in your life will, make decisions or say things that you disagree with. In this case, your
Correct.
parents, and as long as you're being respectful, it's okay to, like you said, circle back and have that conversation.
And you need to know why, because that also informs your decisions in the future.
Yeah, it helps. And it helps you understand where they're
Right.
coming from so that you kind of know their perspective a little better as well.
The next time you go to ask that question, and before you even get to asking the question part, you should remember the last time you asked the question. And what those reasons were. If Dad said we couldn't go somewhere because we had something planned early the next morning, maybe I should ask first, "Hey, Dad, do we have anything planned tomorrow morning?"
Yeah.
No. "Oh, hey, can I go to my friend's house?" So back to high school. No dating or girlfriends. We said it in the introduction.
Yeah.
But that was wholly out of the question. When I started, when I stopped being grossed out by cooties and started wanting cooties, I had to read the book "I Kissed Dating Goodbye." I think it's Harris. What's the last name of the guy who wrote it?
Joshua Harris. Yeah.
Joshua Harris, who is now an atheist and has stopped all publication of those books and wrote an apology book. But I was forced to read that book, and as part of my morning devotions that I was mandated to have every morning, I think it was over the course of a week I had to read a chapter, and then on Friday I had to produce a summary of the chapter.
So you're doing book reports on.
I had
this,
to do
so
book
you
reports
understand
on
it
this
really
book,
well.
and I honestly thought it was full of crap. Even as a kid reading the thing, like I didn't buy it.
And about how old were you then?
I don't know.
Like early
13,
teens, late teens?
13, 14 maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
About
early,
that time.
Early teens, yeah.
Like it's about the time you start wanting cooties and parents notice you getting crushes and things like that. They're
Yeah.
like, no, you don't have a girlfriend. You're not allowed to have a girlfriend. Here's this book. Read why.
Read this.
And in hindsight, the dude was only 8 years older. No, it wasn't. Yeah, 7, 8 years older than I would have been at the time.
That's crazy.
He was 21 when he wrote the book.
Wow. Yeah, that's also crazy. Like a 21-year-old giving advice to like the world. Yeah.
So if I was 13, he was only 8 years older than me.
I was probably close to his age. He was probably I was thinking he was a little older than I am. I'm 41 now.
Okay.
So I don't know, like when did that book come out? Like late 90s, I think, like 99, 2000, something like that.
So it might have been out for a little bit by the time I got to it. But at the time he wrote it anyways.
Yeah, he was.
So my parents had gone with the courting thing. Like they're not stupid. They knew that I was gonna fancy girls. I don't happen to be gay or bi. If I was, that wasn't an option anyways. I didn't even know what that was really until I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Other than debaucherous.
Right.
But
yeah, what you're told, yeah.
So they compromised to this courting idea. Now, the thing that comes with courting, which was convenient for them, was courting is only for the purpose of marriage. Right?
Right.
You don't, and in some stricter senses, it's family arranged. I think Josh Harris was more along the lines of it can still be, the lovebird arranged, but within the family groups. But my parents' line was it's only for marriage. So obviously I couldn't court when I was a freshman in high school. Couldn't court when I was a sophomore. And anytime I got a crush on a girl from the school, even in a small school, that would be enforced by like the segregating of the two of us by parents, by the teachers, by the school faculty, by church members, to where even if we were in a trio of friends having a conversation, that wasn't allowed or whatever you want to call it. But I did eventually work around that, probably because I think they could have. I think they knew at some point they couldn't stop me. When I was a senior in high school working at McDonald's, I caught fancy for a girl that was working there, and I came to him straight up and was like, I want to court this girl. And they're like, and I'm like, nope, this is my senior year in high school. I can get married in 3-4 months when I turn 18. Wow. I want to court this girl, and I kind of forced them to pony up.
Yeah.
So we did. We played by those silly rules, and I suppose she really wasn't. She wasn't a huge fan of it. Like I had to have one of my poor siblings. We still laugh about this in private today.
That's kind of funny.
Between me and my next sibling, and even the next one down, the one that's 8 years younger than me, we still laugh about this on the side, about how just absolutely miserable it was for them to be stuck in the back seat of a car, while the two of us I'm driving back and forth, dropping her off after church or go picking her up, going to a school event or something. Just them back there, just drowning in some really god awful third-rate Hallmark movie.
The sappy conversations that young people have when they're dating. Yeah, yeah. That is pretty funny. Yeah.
But that's how that went. Then I
So
broke
funny.
up, I think, my first semester of college, which is genuinely for the best.
So
But
you were together less than a year, or about a year?
a year and change.
Okay, yeah. So about a year, you guys were together, and so you
Yeah.
did the yeah. So then you went to a really strict Christian college, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It wasn't. It's not as strict as Bob Jones.
But it was far from home, I think, right?
It was. I had. So there were two schools that weren't Bob Jones that had Army ROTC programs. So ever since I was a real little kid, I loved fighter jets. My dad is an aircraft mechanic. He's been since before I was born. So I grew up around airplanes at the airport, and I still love airplanes to this day. But I think I was going into kindergarten. I had to get glasses. So, and I found I couldn't be a fighter pilot because I had glasses. I kind of turned my attention to the whole opposite, and I was going into the Army, right? And so that was it. Even though I don't wear glasses anymore, when I went through puberty, apparently your head can stretch out in a way that corrects your vision.
Wow,
So
that's crazy and
yeah,
kind of
so
awesome.
that
Yeah,
that
that's
happened.
great.
That happened. So I was like 13, 14, and the doc was like, "Oh, you don't need glasses anymore." I'm like, what?
That's crazy. Yeah, I've never heard that before. That's so crazy.
Well, at that time
I wish that would happen to
me.
me now. That would be nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Just sleep funny or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Wake up one day like, hey, everything looks great.
Put a book in your head.
Yeah.
But no, so I was Army all the way, and my life path had been set for me once the future kind of became a thing. When you start looking out past high school,
Yeah.
and it was you graduate high school, you go to college, preferably a good Christian college, you find a wife, and then you get married, get a job. Really in that order. You get married right after graduation. You find a job. You support your family and start making babies for Jesus. That was the whole life plan. So while I was just disgruntled with the environment that I was in with some of the legalistic rules and things, I was still very much a Christian. I just didn't buy all the stuff that came with my parents' version of Christianity.
Yeah, the super strict stuff. Yeah.
Right. I wanted to go to a church that had a band. I wanted to listen to heavy metal, but I really didn't know what all that entailed. For a time, I thought Stephen Curtis Chapman was heavy metal, so bear with me.
Yeah. So hang on here. I had a long way to go.
A long way to go, but I still wanted to go to a Christian college, get a good education, and do what my dad had done and work in the real world and provide for his family, but still be a God-loving, good Christian example to everybody in the world. So that's
So you're making your faith your own,
Right.
adapting it to what makes sense.
And now I did pull up that verse. Where is it at? I can't remember where it's at, but it's something about, I think it's the Apostle Paul writing it, about every person has to work out their faith for their own with fear and trembling or something like that.
Yeah.
But I pointed that out to my parents late in high school, and they were not fans.
Yeah, they don't like that. Yeah.
No, I'm like, no, you're gonna do what we say. But Bob Jones wasn't an option because they didn't have an ROTC program. The school wasn't accredited, so they couldn't, at the time they weren't. So they couldn't have one. And a lot of ROTC programs, actually they operate from like one large school's campus. So
Okay.
so the school up north that was an option was Maranatha. They had an ROTC program, but the ROTC cadets at Maranatha, all branches, attend their ROTC classes, PT, labs at, I'm not sure what college it is, but a state school.
Okay.
And even smaller.
It's kind of the home base for the other
yeah,
little
the
ROTCs.
program I went to, there was nine additional schools involved in that ROTC program, just the Army one. And that was just all the smaller schools across the area didn't have the population to justify a full-blown program. So the school would work it out with the bigger school, the state school where I went to school in Florida, where those credits would just transfer back and forth.
Yeah. Okay.
And you show up for your class at the state school, and then go back to your home school where you're actually paying tuition. But I really didn't want to go way up north. And I'd I'll call it known of, he was 4 or 6 years older than me, a kid who was the former pastor of the church's son, who had gone to the school in Florida that I ended up at the ROTC program. And there were still some folks at the state school who remembered who he was. So I was able to get kind of like name recognition a little bit to get myself down in there. And the place, it was, I remember it.
It's because you knew the guy from your church.
I knew the
right?
guy, I knew the school,
yeah.
and it was recommended. Bob Jones had begun falling out of favor at our church specifically. The pastor that we had all through probably through middle school to high school, he was a Bob Jones grad. But there were some older kids of ours, or that were friends of ours, that had started attending Bob Jones. And at first, the stories of the garbage they were being put through were kind of written off as, they're just rebellious kids. And then it started happening with the next kid. They had the oldest kid, and then the next started happening with the next kid. So our pastor called down there to one of his buddies who still taught down there and asked him directly, hey, is this stuff happening? And his friend wouldn't give an answer.
And when you talk about garbage happening down there, was it like criminal activity, or was it like...
It was, well, unless you have a religious exemption, it would be criminal activity, which Bob does. Okay. It was blatant discrimination. It was, I'm sure other folks may have mentioned it. It's at fundamentalist Christian schools. There's a thing called the purge that happens at the end of every spring, where the school or the like the dorm supervisors, the dean of students, both male and female, they kind of get together and they identify a month or so out from the end of the semester kids that they don't want coming back. And then they make it their life mission to get that kid enough demerits.
Wow.
So that kid can't have any recourse on the school for not being able to come back.
Yeah. Force them out, basically.
It was things like that. And when he did some more research, he found out that there was that and among a whole bunch of other things. His family was Puerto Rican. So there was some real racial discrimination going on against these kids.
Yeah.
And when they wouldn't admit to it, apologize to it, they wouldn't deny it. That's his friend. His friend didn't deny it. His friend just said, I can't talk about that.
Wow.
That's when the school stopped inviting the Bob Jones recruiters to the school. Just flat out. Said no. But it was obviously, there's a lot of people in the church and school, the teachers and whatnot, that were Bob Jones grads. One of my teachers was from Maranatha. And he was one of the assistant soccer coach. So I knew of that place. I was familiar with what that was, but hell, it's Florida, man. We're talking going from Ohio to Florida. Why would I want to go further north when I can go to Florida? I'd never been to Florida, never seen a palm tree. I mean,
that's cool.
So it was, I remember specifically, it was 1,003 miles away on the odometer, driveway to driveway. Now, I Google mapped it a couple days ago to triple check, and it ended up being 998. So I'm going to count in getting off exits, off ramps, on ramps to round up that
Yeah.
1,000. So my memory's still there. But it was going to be far away, and I won a 4-year scholarship to it.
Cool.
So tuition scholarships. That was convenient because that's how I had to pay for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the critical part.
So that turned out to be interesting, even leading up to it. So there was so for context, without being too specific, my dad had gotten laid off from his job the January of my senior year in high school.
Okay.
And he started a company through a church friend, putting relief cuts in concrete pads. Basically, we turn a big concrete pad into a Hershey's bar instead of a Crunch bar. So when it torques and whatnot, it settles, it cracks along predicted lines. Dirty job, long hours. Usually get on the pad between 3 and 4 p.m., start staffing chalk lines, and we were terrible at it. So we wouldn't finish until 3, 4 a.m. Once we got better at it, it took us about 2 hours less. But most of this work was up in Columbus, Ohio. Mm-hmm. So it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from home. So my dad would pick me up from school. There's no spring sports at the school, so he would pick me up from school. I quit my job at McDonald's, and he'd pick me up from school around 1:30, and we'd roll up to Columbus, cut concrete all night. I'd come home, get home 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little bit later, sleep for a few hours, go to school the next day.
Wow. So you were doing a lot of hard work. That was your senior year?
That was the last half of my senior year.
Yeah. Wow.
High school. So, I enjoyed it.
That's cool.
That paid me $10 an hour, which was like $3 more than what I was making at
good.
McDonald's. So that's pretty good. But we were coming back, and this was after I graduated high school. It was probably a month out from going to college, and we were driving back from an easy job. So it was early morning, and I still remember the road we were on. We were on 72 heading south, and I had asked my dad, hey, I want to go out with my girlfriend at the time and some friends. Like, there's a group of us going out. It wasn't just her and me, a group of us going out. And my friends, it was like a few people maybe we knew from work or something. And we were going to maybe go see a movie. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever you do in the summertime.
Something simple.
And he was like, no, I don't, we can't go out because I don't know any of those other people. And I'd had enough at this point. Totally, wholeheartedly had enough. Because at that moment, the only thing he had bargaining-wise was I was staying in his house.
Yeah.
That was it.
He's losing his leverage.
Eating his food.
Yeah.
I was about to go off. I would be no longer financially obligated to him. If they were letting me take, I now graduated to a 92 Toyota Corolla. They were letting me take that down there. But at the end of the day, I didn't need that. I had enough money in the bank for a one-way flight ticket, get me down to school, and I'd be fine.
You were self-sufficient, yeah. So you can be a little brave now.
Well,
a little braver than before because you don't depend on him like you used to. Maybe.
Yes. So I remember looking over at him. I was driving, and I remember looking over at him and be like, do you expect me to do this while I'm down at college in Florida? And I was hoping that would be the light bulb moment in his head.
Right. It makes sense
like
to me.
That would flip the switch to where he'd be like, oh, yeah, you are an adult now. And you are, for the most part, self-sufficient. Okay, considering that, yes, you can go out with your friends. But he just doubled down. And he was like, yes, in fact, I expect you to give me a call before you go out with your friends. every time you want to go out. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, now I'm flabbergasted because I'm like, I didn't expect it to go this way. So I look at him and I'm like, but I know the answer you're going to give. The answer you're going to give is no, because I don't know those kids and I don't know their parents or whatever.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, you're probably right. I probably am going to tell you no. And I was just like, okay. And I said, do you know what's going to happen? I said, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to call you out of just basic bottom of the barrel respect. And I'm going to ask you, you're going to say no. I'm going to close the phone, flip phone days.
Yep.
I'm going to close the phone and I'm going to go out anyways because there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. And what's crazy is you weren't like going out and like shooting heroin. You were going out to like a movie.
It literally would have been, well, there's no movies allowed at the college, so it literally would have been a Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Or Checkers.
It's like seriously
would
like
probably
such...
be just as dangerous as shooting heroin down there, but yes.
Yeah, it's like harmless, normal stuff that, kids do. Yeah.
And this was a college where you couldn't leave campus outside of a mixed party, or excuse me, you couldn't leave in a mixed party with less than 3 people in the vehicle. And you had to sign out and sign back in when you passed the guard gate. You couldn't go to movie theaters. There was a curfew during Sunday through Thursday night. It was 10 p.m. Saturday night through Thursday night, it was 10 p.m. and on Fridays it was midnight. So
they were super strict anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember the look on his face after I told him I'm going to do what I want. That's when it wasn't a light bulb anymore. It was a nuclear bomb going off in his head. When I think he genuinely realized for the first time that they won't actually have control of me after I leave. Like I don't think
they hadn't processed it maybe until that point.
That's exactly what I think it is. They hadn't processed beyond. I don't know when. I think they thought,
or maybe they didn't think you'd push back and say, hey, I don't like that. I don't want to do that.
I would respect them as parents until I got married, and then they could wash my hands of it because it's now me and my wife making decisions. But I just it still hurts when I remember the look on his face.
What did that make you feel like when you saw him react?
I was it made me feel sad because I didn't mean for it to impact him that hard. It was just it was supposed to be just a simple clarification of the reality that's going to be in a few months or in a few weeks or a month or so. And it was devastating to him, like absolutely devastating to him that I would have such callous disregard. But I also think it was going through his head that he may have realized in that moment that he fucked up.
Yeah, like maybe he went too far.
Because my brother was allowed to date and have girlfriends. My next sibling, he was allowed to date and have girlfriends. Now we're 4 years apart, right? So he was just coming in. Now it was still.
So you mean after you once
correct.
your younger brother got to your age, then he was able to do the things you couldn't do.
Like he was 4 years younger than me. So when I'm 18, he's 14.
So at 14, he could do things you couldn't at 18.
Correct.
So why was that? That seems like an obvious.
This was after my dad and I's conversation in the van on the way home. Like I think that's what I'm describing. Like I think in that moment it was earth shattering to him. And I didn't mean to cause him that much pain, so I felt bad in that moment.
Yeah.
Like I got my point across, and I was happy about that. But I'd hurt the man, and I didn't. That wasn't my intent in that moment. But I really do think well, I'll take some uncredited credit for my brother, but but it was still chaperoned. Obviously, they had to be in friend groups, or they had to be at their a parent's house or whatever. But he was allowed to have those girlfriends, make those friends outside of school, and do that sort of thing. But
that was a big moment, that conversation with your dad.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what I went off to college with that kind of that memory in the back of my mind.
Yeah. That's a significant turning point.
Yeah, I didn't mean to hurt him. But I guess it is what it was.
Yeah, it is what it was. Yeah. So I was curious how because I know you end up going to a different school. So what gets you? I think I know, but I wanted to ask you what gets you from the fundamentalist Christian out of that fundamentalist Christian school.
So at the fundamentalist Christian school, I've already mentioned some of the rules, but included in that, per tradition, there is chapel every morning. So I mean, I went in as a biology major, and that only lasted one semester. Because literally it was up at 4 a.m., Army PT at a different campus, back, get a quick bite for breakfast, chapel, classes.
Wow.
And then because of my schedule having to go off campus for the Army stuff, our schedule as all RC was weird. Like, we'd have night classes. So I mean, it was brutal, beyond the culture shock of just any kid getting out and getting into a serious, you have to manage your own life, sort of.
And life's been managed for you all the way.
Even in a controlled environment, like, you are now the only person responsible for making sure that you turn a paper in on time.
Yeah.
like you're it. Your professor's not going to remind you. That's been on the syllabus since day one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I had, through the Army ROTC program, I had started to see things weren't quite right. The best way I can put this into words is, if anybody's seen the movie The Truman Show with Jim Carrey, when he starts to notice, that's weird, that's not quite right. And what it was for me was, I started to notice that the worldly people, the people of the world, the people outside of my now Christian bubble, which was larger than what it had been through church and family growing up, but I'd started to notice that the folks outside of the Christian college, on a whole, were more honest. They were less judgmental. And with that judgment comes a whole lot of sub things like pettiness and backbiting and gossip.
Yeah.
That stuff exists in the real world, but it's
magnified,
it's not
maybe,
as
or
focused, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the folks had integrity. I know there was Christians that existed outside of the Christian college, but I wouldn't have known unless I asked them. It didn't matter. It was irrelevant. You come in, don't be a shitbag, do your classes, do what you need to do, and then you go on your merry way. And at the college I was at, there was all the silly rules to follow. And if you knew somebody was breaking the rules, so for example, if you were driving to a movie theater that was roughly 35-40 minutes north of the college campus, that was big enough to where you probably wouldn't be recognized, and you were going to see movies.
Yeah.
If you knew somebody who's doing that, and they got caught, and they said that you knew they were doing it. Let's pretend they borrowed your car.
Yeah. So you were incriminated, and like you had knowledge, and
You
they
would
could
get
prove
the
it.
same punishment as they would because you didn't turn them in for it.
It's so crazy. It just reminds me of like Soviet Russia, or something.
It is Soviet
Like
Russia.
it is crazy. Like the state is
It's
like controlling
North
everything you do.
Korea. That's
Yeah,
was it
it's
Hitchens that
crazy.
compared to North Korea? But and pride was taken in weeding those out who didn't conform and didn't follow the rules. If you weren't listening, if you liked, now they had no headphone rules in the dorms, but most of the dorm supervisors really didn't care. It was like, just don't get caught while I'm with my boss,
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah.
But technically you weren't supposed to listen to even contemporary Christian music, but that was wholly unenforceable. Especially since we were allowed to leave campus.
Yeah, you can listen to what you want when you're not there.
And it had been established the year before I got there. They had to fire the head of security, which they didn't fire him, they just promoted him out of that position. But he had to move positions. He was no longer able to have that position because somebody with a brain and the cojones to actually do it pinned the school down legally on searching vehicles, demanding that you unlock the vehicles, and if you didn't unlock the vehicles, they would jimmy the door open and searching people's vehicles.
That's crazy.
And it wasn't law enforcement doing it. It was security doing it and other faculty doing it. Or staff, staff doing it.
It's so ridiculous.
And now after that, they obviously you have your once or twice a semester where the K-9 units come through the dorms and they do their thing. That's just kind of like general public safety sort of thing. But when they were jimmying locks, like I think they'd confiscated something out of a student's car, and I think the student called the police and reported a theft.
Yeah, well,
because they took
it against their will.
That car is his private property in the confined campus. Anyways, it was something like that. I don't know the details. Crazy. I wasn't there. So they couldn't enforce it in the cars. So as soon as you roll off campus, man, you drop in whatever you wanted to play. And but all that little rabbit trail. This was either sometime my sophomore year. I can't remember exactly at what point it was. There was a close friend of ours, one of the inner circles of our little group of friends, who was sexually assaulted in her dorm room by her roommates.
Wow.
And I and three other friends were like the first people that she'd come running to after she got away.
Wow.
And obviously we told her to call the police. Well, she didn't have, didn't we? I don't know. We told her to call the police. She called the police, and then went to the security office to let them know that the police were showing up. Well, they turned the police away. So they wouldn't allow the victim to contact the police. They didn't punish the people who were the perpetrators, and they wouldn't allow the victim to move dorm units. And pretty much told the victim to deal with the spiritual she had a heart problem or something instead of the assault itself.
They made it her problem. They blamed the victim, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
And because, the three of us...
And prevented the victim from talking to the cops? I mean,
correct.
Did she consider, just going on her own to the police and speaking, or...
Well, by this point, she called her parents. And her parents worked at a state university somewhere else. I'm not going to say where.
Yeah.
Were fairly tenured at this institution. And they were Christians as well, and they are of the same vein of Christian.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, we're gonna, since the police were initially involved, we're gonna deal with this different way. And that started again because they were tenured at another university. One was faculty, one was staff, and the staff parent knew how this stuff worked, and they were able to get a federal agency. It would be the Department of Education, but they were able to get the feds to investigate the school's handling of it for the purposes of accreditation.
Wow. That's pretty gutsy. I mean, they're going for it. To
Correct.
me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like those parents were so upset at the school that they wanted to make sure that this hurt the school.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, they went for the big stuff. Like,
Instead
no,
of just having it, yeah.
Right. There's not one or two you getting a slap on the wrist. Like, your school
taking
gets,
the whole
the
thing
school
down.
basically gets shut down.
Yeah.
So, in the couple weeks that it took all that to begin to transpire, we were kind of making a big fuss out of it. She wasn't necessarily, obviously. We were kind of making a fuss about it, and we very quickly became the direct targets of expulsion, to the point that when the feds got involved, each of us in our own way had expressed to the investigator, because we were, I suppose, other than the people who'd done it, the closest thing to witnesses there were. We were there. She came to us because we were within eyesight.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool, I suppose. We were put on a list. I think the list ended up being 6 or 7 students that the school could not expel or retaliate against.
Interesting.
And we got this letter, and it showed all of us that were on the list. And I specifically remember calling the investigator, the head investigator, and calling her and being like, hey, this protects us from them giving us a whole bunch of demerits or harassment in an effort to expel us or directly expelling us. What this doesn't protect us from is, if you look in the student contract that we're all forced to sign, it says they can deny readmission for any reason. I was like, it doesn't protect us from that. She was like, oh. She goes, send me that student contract. And literally the next letter was like, attached all other terms and conditions.
Yeah.
that included that thing.
That's really funny.
But at one point in the investigation, it was discovered that the dean of women had been falsifying reports and interviews. She'd sat down per the investigators telling her she needed to do this, interview these people, and she had been forging the interviews.
Wow.
Like, investigator goes to student X and says, hey, I have a few questions to clarify. You spoke with the dean of women on this day at this time, and then she asked this question, you said this, and the student was like, I never talked to her.
Oh. So they...
So instead of holding that person responsible, they retired them on good terms with their pension and everything like that. And then the person who's responsible for like the college's scope of reviewing their procedures and things like that, had been like straight up threatening witnesses, students, us, the witnesses, the victim, both physically and financially. Like, would walk up to you, pull you aside, or call you into his office and say, if you say anything untowards or whatever I deem untowards to the investigators, I will find a way to expel you, and we will keep your tuition money.
Wow. Yeah, just abusive. Abusive behavior. Yeah.
When we all were like, okay. Because, again, the 2 of us in the group were Army cadets, one of which, and the school's accredited too, so it's like, you expel me, fine, I have to find another Christian college to go to. It would have been inconvenient as all get out.
Yeah.
If they didn't let you come back the next semester, was fine. It's the expulsion part where you lose 4 months of your life.
Yeah.
But us Army kids, we're like, first off, the Army pays you, so the Army's gonna want to know why you took their money, and the odds are, if they find out why, they're taking it back. And we called up the investigators, and we're like, hey, this guy just pulled us into office and told us this, and he's told 3 of us now, and there's another guy in the office at the moment. That guy was forced to out of that position on the terms of the Fed's investigation, and he got promoted because he had been the dean of men, and now that the dean of women had been forcefully retired, he became the dean of student life.
Oh, like everyone.
Yes.
So it was he was forced out of his position based on the conditions that the Fed set, but then he basically had to. They didn't prevent him from coming back and getting a different position. Is that?
No, they just were like, well, instead of hiring somebody to be the dean of women,
just slip you right in there, and
yeah, we'll just slip you right up in there. That guy's ready to retire. They moved that guy to, I don't know, something else. They just like shuffled people around a little bit and just, well, we have one less salary to pay, right?
Yeah. So was it the government that forced him to leave his position, or was it the school? I was a little confused.
Well, it would have been the government. I wouldn't use the word forced because I don't know all the nitty-gritty details, but it probably was strongly suggested.
Yeah, that he not be there. So he was the dean of men, and then he became the dean of student life, which was over men and women?
The president of student life.
Oh.
So they eliminated the position of the deans.
Okay. Yeah.
So
and created one to go over everybody, basically.
Correct.
So he just basically got a promotion, which is crazy, yeah.
So at that point, that was kind of the end of my traditional Christian faith.
Okay. I was wondering that would happen.
Or I should say, the holding on to the core tenets of Christianity that I had been raised with. Yeah. I was already listening to rock music. I was dating a girl at the college. In fact, no. At that time, I was dating a girl at a different college. Anyways, I was dating a girl, and starting. I don't know. My parents would have said I was living worldly, but I was really more of just your run-of-the-mill generic evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
So
that's what just makes you decide to leave that school.
Correct.
Yeah.
I was done with that school after seeing all that stuff, and that transpired for a couple months. I had already noticed the people outside of the school in my Army ROTC program, and it came down to, from my earliest memories, I've been in church 3 times a week, and in college I had to go to church 3 times a week as well. But in the mandatory chapel service Monday through Friday, college-approved church, I'd done my devotions, I prayed regularly, I poured myself into being the best ambassador for Christ I could be. And I was just done after seeing what these people were like, the people who were I was told to emulate, who were the examples of godliness that I needed to look up to be like. Those were not people I wanted to be. And if that meant no longer being Christ-like, air quotes, like what I've been told Christ-like was, then fine. Because the people who were modeling the Bible as I'd been taught and showing me how I was supposed to live were absolutely despicable in my mind.
Yeah.
And it turned into no longer a simple rebellion against the rules. Like I was just, if this was Christianity, if this is what Christianity is, I want no part of that religion.
Yeah.
And it kind of moved towards like I still have a relationship. It was more like personal relationship sort of thing.
Yeah, it's my own personal faith, and
Correct.
yeah,
Still,
which is what
I
it is
still
for a lot of
believe that
people. Yeah,
Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and that I needed to live my best life to glorify Him and be a witness for Him and things like that. But that witness part was dialed all the way down to almost zero, and it was I'm just going to be a good person, and I know where I stand with my God.
Yeah. How did you go from the feeling of like making Christianity your own, but you're still kind of a generic Christian, to where you are today? But I mean, how did it progress from that point? I guess how did your faith change?
I transferred to the state school the next semester, the same one that my ROTC program was through. Moved out of the dorms and into renting a house with some other Army guys. So it was the first time as a real free adult, and it was terrifying but exciting at the same time. And I was now free. I was free to make my own decisions. There was no more rules for me. I was able to form my own opinions, make my own friends, experience reality as it truly existed. I was able to make mistakes, like getting hammered on a Wednesday night, then having to go to PT at 6 a.m. the next morning.
Oh no!
It's like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably won't. Well, it would happen
on a weekday again. Yeah.
It would happen again, but like, let's remember this for as long as I can.
But you know what you're
Don't
getting into the next time,
right? And I saw for the first time that people who didn't hold the same opinion as me weren't evil, and they weren't to be avoided. I learned that talking to somebody with a different perspective helped me to understand that perspective. And even if I didn't agree, I needed to accept their right to have that opinion.
Yeah. It's a big realization to have.
Correct. I learned that homosexuals weren't monsters and pedophiles. That was kind of a big deal because that's all I've been taught growing up.
Yeah.
They're the worst of the worst. Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. Yeah. It's seen as very, very bad. Yeah.
I was like, all of a sudden now, at least within the periphery of the friend group, there are some gay people, and it's like, oh, you're just another person, and that was kind of earth shattering to me. Like, I learned that there were folks who lived in different cultures that didn't need Christianity impressed upon them. I started, through friends suggesting things, discovering music with sounds I did not know could exist.
I think that must have been amazing for you because music had been kept from you in a way, or had been kept from you. And so you're discovering like new music. It must have been so awesome, so cool.
I went from, Stephen Curtis Chapman is heavy metal, was, my opinion, at 13, 14, 15 years old, to having discovered the Newsboys, early in my college career, pre-Michael Tate. And I still appreciate the early stuff. They were genuinely ahead of their time. But to now, so I'm like, oh, Breaking Benjamin exists. 3 Days Grace exists. Oh, there's Linkin Park. Holy crap. Like, the first two albums, like, where was that? And it's like, oh, there's this band called As They Lay Dying. Like, who's, there's and I didn't know those sounds could be made.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
That's cool.
So that was really neat. So at the time, my girlfriend, now wife, she was still attending the Christian college. So she had to go to church every Sunday. And until her senior year, she couldn't go off campus by herself with me. So Sundays was kind of one of the only times we could hang out, because I wasn't going to go hang out at the school I left.
Yeah.
So we ended up finding a quote unquote cool church. And by cool church, I mean they played contemporary Christian music for the worship service, and it was casual. There was a deacon that was a woman.
Wow.
So that was the cool church. But even then, she still had to get written permission from her dad to go to that church, because it wasn't on the Christian college's approved list. Wow. And even though she was 21 at the time, she was still property of her father. It wasn't you have to ask your parents. It wasn't you have to ask your mother. It was you have to get permission. We need to see your dad's signature.
Wow. Saying
that he gave you permission to go to this church, which we did. But
so you're able to go to this cooler church,
correct,
basically.
Cool church, which started to kind of bring me back around a little bit. It was kind of like I'd been angry at the Christians I'd seen at the school for how they handled my friend's ordeal, and now I was kind of like, well, yeah, those people are assholes, but the people at this church, these people are more genuine, right?
Yeah.
It's not all about
more real.
Right, what you do. It's more of who you are, sort of thing. That's I kind of had a little bit of a resurgence, but it wasn't until I had a professor for some sort of science class I needed a credit for at the state school. Mm-hmm. And she was a reverend in her own right. She had like 2 PhDs. One was in whatever science I was taking, and then a PhD of theology or something. Very smart woman. And we had this assignment, and I don't even remember what it was, but it involves something to do with evolution or something or another. And I put in my paper the young Earth creation thing, because that's all I'd been taught. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
I didn't have the slightest clue about evolution, other than it was stupid and man-made, and man's effort to write God out of their being responsible to him or something like that.
Yeah.
So I put that in there, and I turned in my paper. And the next class, so about 2 days later, after class, she calls me up and she goes, "Hey, I'm going to give you the opportunity to rewrite this paper." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I thought I was just a knucklehead at that point. I was like, "Well, I screwed something up royally, and she's just being nice to me." And she goes, "I need you to take out the theology and put in science." And I was like, "Well, that is science." And she goes, "No, it's not. Rewrite the paper."
Wow.
And this was coming from a pat. Now, at this point, I wasn't terrified of the idea or thought that women shouldn't be pastors. I kind of stopped caring.
Yeah.
Like, that's a stupid rule in the Bible. But she was very intelligent, and she clearly understood, and I knew that she knew that she knew where I was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, she understood it, yeah.
She was like, "You're a kid who doesn't know any better. Genuinely doesn't know any better. And even if you do this out of spite because you have to rewrite it, at least you'll get a little bit of education. All right? You'll have to have done the research."
Cool. I mean, in a way, it's really cool that she gave you that, that she kind of saw the situation.
Seen her since I finished that semester, but if I did remember what she looked like or what her name was, I would tell her thank you. Because that did kind of pique my interest a little bit. It's still bullshit, but you know.
But it made you have to think a little bit deeper about something.
And I was, this was maybe a week or so later, I was griping to a friend of mine who I had a lot of respect for. Was very intelligent. I knew he was an atheist. I really didn't know what that meant, but I knew he was an atheist. And I was griping to him. We'd gone to breakfast after PT or something, and I was griping to him while we were walking to the cars. And I told him that story. And I was like, it's not right that, I have to lie on the paper or something to support the evolution view when creationism is just as viable as a theory, right? That's what we're taught.
Yeah.
And I'd never been taught evolution. I knew it existed, but and he looked at me and he was just like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There's no support or evidence for biblical creation whatsoever. And he said it so fast and so it was a soul punch coming from this person who I admired.
Yeah.
Like, what? And then I don't know. I kind of wrote it off. I didn't really think about it a whole lot. And
it's one of those comments that later on it you remember
right.
it, but in the moment it was just shocking.
It wasn't until years later that came back, and I was like, okay, maybe I need. Well, I understood why he said it so curtly. Like by that point when it came back, I was like, holy crap, I understand now what he was doing. Like that doesn't work on everybody, but it worked on me. It was like. It's like, holy crap.
Someone says it so quickly and so when they're so sure of themselves, it really it does something. Like it really sticks with you. Like, whoa, this person like this person's 100% confident of what they're saying, and I know that they're right. Even if you didn't agree with them, like that's the feeling you get. Like, oh shit,
He just wholly disregarded my entire understanding of how the world works.
Yeah, in one comment.
And I was like, what? So at some point during my wife's and I engagement, I had admitted to her that I'd felt total apathy towards Christianity and or God, even with the cool church. I told her that I didn't know and I really didn't care about God, but I'd no longer be attending church just because even at the cool church, the disparity in character between Christians and those I saw outside of Christianity was too great.
Yeah.
And her only comment on that, to her credit, was, well, okay, she made the mention that she's not there, she's not at that point, but so long as I don't keep her from going to church, then we can continue on our relationship.
Seems reasonable.
So she graduated in the spring. I graduated in the end of the summer. And a couple months later, I went off to training out in Missouri, and she moved back into the South to live near her parents, basically at her grandmother's house in one of the spare rooms.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't a PCS move out there. It wasn't a PCS move out there. It was a TDY move, and we wanted to move back up out of Florida anyways at that point.
You said it was a TDY move?
PCS means permanent change of station. That's when your family comes with you. When the military moves your family. A TDY is temporary duty.
Oh, okay. So it's temporary duty for you. You had to go out to another state. She's moving back home at the time.
Yeah, closer to home, because we wanted to move back up to where the general area where we're at now anyways. Yeah. While I was at training, my sister had called me and said that she had attempted suicide. She'd gotten in an argument with my parents, and she'd walked outside to separate herself from the argument, and they'd locked her out of the house. And she was probably 15 or 16-ish at the time. And she was just like, everything is miserable. My sister and I are stubborn and inquisitive in the same way. So she couldn't find anything useful enough to do it, and she'd called me the next day. So I called my parents, and they just dismissed it wholly out of hand as her being dramatic. Wouldn't accept any responsibility. And I knew on some level that they were doing the same stuff they'd done to me.
Yeah.
So when she started explaining stuff to me, like I could wholly empathize or sympathize with what she's going through.
Yeah.
And while I've never been one to have that state of mind, it does exist.
Yeah.
So I told my sister that when I was done in training, that my wife and I would move to where they lived. And at least then she would have somewhere to run away to. Somewhere, within the same city or town.
Yeah.
And so we did. I finished training, picked up my wife from the city we actually currently live in, and made our way all the way to the coast. And when we moved there after a few months, we started attending a small home church. And my wife had talked me into it because it was wholly different than any other church either of us had attended. It was done in the spirit of like the early churches that the Apostle Paul talks about writing to, the ones he wrote to, and the other ones he mentions. So I was like, okay, because again, I wasn't not a Christian.
Yeah.
I just really didn't care anymore.
Yeah. Apathetic.
I rolled all the way on to the once saved, always saved. I'll be fine. I already got my ticket. I already got my ticket to heaven. I'll be okay.
Yeah.
So we did, and we really didn't fit in there. I think it was because we'd both been out in the real world for a little bit. Like after we graduated college, and we were still spending those next few months in Florida before I went to training. We didn't go to church at all. We didn't care, and I think, and we both been working, and I don't think the church, the tiny church culture and all that stuff, it was just silly.
Yeah.
It was silly, and the place gave off after the first little while some very cult-like vibes.
Oh.
So we just stopped going. We stopped going, and
this little home church, right?
Yes, this little home church, and we didn't go anywhere else. Like we weren't going to go to the church that my parents.
You just stopped at that point, yeah.
Right. I think she was maybe a year or two behind me, in her thinking about God and Christianity and stuff.
Yeah. On the same path.
We really never talked about it a whole lot. I didn't feel like it was my place.
That's always interesting to me that you, like, me and my wife talked about it so much, but I've had several people tell me that like they didn't really talk about it with their spouse, and sometimes you end up at the same place,
Yeah, I mean,
it's amazing.
If she would ask me something or what I thought about something, we would obviously have a conversation about it. But I was not one to instigate it.
Yeah, you were letting her work her thoughts out on her own, and you kind of had your own thoughts about it, and.
Yeah. Because of the job I had in that city, it was a dead end job. It was the first job that I'd gotten, and it paid me enough to, for the two of us together to have an apartment and pay groceries, and there was an awesome Asian restaurant right down the road, so we could get that once a week, right? And this dead end job involved a lot of monotonous just stuff. Now you couldn't wear headphones because we were working around heavy machinery with chemicals and things like that. So there wasn't any headphones. So literally I would stand for sometimes 6-8 hours a day just feeding stuff into a machine.
Wow.
And you got a lot of time to sit there and think when literally the only responsibility you have is feed it straight, pick up the next one, feed it straight, pick up the next one. And I'd think about something, I'd debate it in my head all the way around with the information I knew, and then I would have a fairly decent memory. So I'd then go home, and I would write the stuff down, and then I'd look it up. I'd see if I was correct. right? If I was like, well, it can't be A because of this list of things. And I'm like, well, I'm not really sure about some of that. So like, then I'd go look it up and either confirm or learn something new. And they'd be like, oh shit. Okay. Now I have to rethink this whole process. Good thing I had time. I researched a little bit of the history of the Bible. During that time, I kind of came hung up on the idea that the character of a God who would create the circumstance in which he would condemn people to hell if they did not love him for saving them from the hell he created.
So that was the sticking point.
That kind of started sticking that, mulling that around in my head. Still hadn't discovered biological evolution. In every religion, to the best of my knowledge, that I try to compare in my head, they all kind of seem like different flavors of light beer, right?
That was a funny comparison, yeah.
You had, you've got Bud Light, Miller Lite, Yingling, Coors Light, and all the other lights, and everybody kind of has their favorite preferences, one or two, but at the end of the day, they're all kind of the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more I had science questions, and the more I looked, because I now had full unfettered access to the internet and actually cared to look stuff up, the more I started to question the efficacy of what I've been taught as a kid. It also didn't help, and it actually confirmed what I learned from college, that my boss was a legitimate asshole. Self-absorbed, used intimidation, verbally abusive to his employees and his teenage son, even physically abusive to a teenage son. And he was a super Christian and made everyone knew how holy and awesome he was.
Yeah.
This guy was ridiculous. Yeah. There was one shift in the industry I worked in. We were like a supplier for like fulfillment yards. So if they get a big project that comes in that they're selling to, we may have stuff come in last minute. And that would happen sometimes. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. Work an extra 1 or 2 hours, knock the stuff out, go home.
Yeah.
But it was actually my birthday. And I think it was on a Thursday maybe. We had dinner plans. So on my birthday, and dinner plans were, let's pretend, say at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. We usually shut the shop down around 3:30 or 4.
So you had plenty of time.
And the next stack gets set up, and I'm shoving stuff in the machine. Next stack gets set up. Okay, it's 3:30. Next stack gets set up, still shoving stuff in the machine. Now it's 4:30. I'm like, okay, we're working late, whatever. And he would never tell us when we're working late. He just expected us to continue to work. And then I saw the shop foreman leave. I'm like, man, where's he going? And then the boss starts dropping more stuff off. And he's just doing one at a time. Like, he's not stacking it all up so I could see the end and ask a question. Like, hey, man, I've got somewhere to be.
Yeah.
He just wanted
it's just
time.
Like trickle. Yeah.
And finally, it was getting close to where I had to get home. And it was right between he wanted us to do a changeover on the machine. And that's going to take another 30 minutes before we can start feeding again. And I was like, hey, I have somewhere I have to be tonight. I mean, let's pretend it was at 8. It's now 7.
Yeah.
Like, I have somewhere I have to be tonight. I have dinner reservations. And he goes, well, you're going to have to cancel those. I'm like, I have dinner reservations. It's my birthday. And he goes, and that's my problem? And I'm like, I've been here now for an extra 3.5, 4 hours from the time Wow. This was this guy. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, what I found out a couple years ago, it's probably the same. That's what was going through my head.
Wow.
And I still had that fear of hell in me. That was kind of sitting in my gut. Like, what?
Yeah.
What
if I'm wrong?
And I was very much aware that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is an unforgivable sin. At that point, it was. So now my attention to a small point kind of turned to, okay, what can I do? Because I have my ticket to heaven. What can I do to keep that valid? how do I not blaspheme the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
And also, can I maintain some watered down semblance of Christianity? Because depending on where you read in the Bible, if you're an out apostate, you've also voided your ticket.
Yeah, like no matter what you do from that point on, even if you recant, it doesn't matter.
Correct.
Yeah.
And my wife told me the other day when she was reviewing part of my notes, she did mention that during that time when we lived near my sister, that I had started sort of doing what I wanted. Just I drank more when I wanted. I stopped kind of caring what other people thought.
Yeah.
I probably would have called myself a deist at that time, but I didn't know what that was. Like that word was not part of my vocabulary. During that time, I did deploy. I did deploy with the Army. It was on very short notice, and that was so. If some listeners haven't picked up on or not familiar with the military, so I graduated and commissioned with the Army ROTC program. So I was an officer, and at the time I was a first lieutenant when I deployed, and I deployed last minute to fill a position as the XO, or the second in charge of a transportation company. And that was a very intense learning and maturing curve. I hadn't developed a leadership style at all. And I honestly, I really didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground when it came to doing that stuff. And everything that I've been, and this is probably why the military appealed to me so much as a kid, but everything I've been taught growing up was black and white. You know, black, white, can or can't, do or don't. And my commander, he operated in the gray spaces. He took the idea in at least U.S. military doctrine to operate within the commander's intent. He took that to heart. And
I feel like that's real life. Yeah.
I'd never seen that before. I had no clue what that was. I'm going, we're supposed to do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's these steps we have to do no matter how painful it is. And he'd roll in and be like, we can accomplish the same thing. We're just going to do 2 and 5. And I just, again, very steep learning and maturing curve.
Yeah.
For a few months during that deployment, I went to a different base from where my company was at, and did some work out of there. And I was the only one that I knew there. At this base. It's about 2.5 hour flight from the other one. I went from Kandahar to Bagram, and
where's Bagram?
Bagram is about 30 minutes outside of Kabul, so it's
okay. So yeah, you were in Afghanistan. Yeah, that's what I thought. But yeah, okay.
Okay.
Had to ask.
Sorry, yeah, I was in Afghanistan,
yeah.
And I had a lot of time there to read and research. I mean, my routine literally was I get to the office at between 5:30 and 6 a.m. I take 2 hours for lunch. I go work out, take a shower, have lunch, and then back to work. And I get back to my little cubicle of a bunk, 7 or 8 p.m. So I had the rest of the evening or so to read a book, watch something on the YouTube. With 1 Mbps internet, which was difficult.
Oh, man.
But I had started seriously doubting at that point. Because you go from God has everything in control and everything's part of his plan, and that's being told to you here in the United States, where you are in, at least the way I grew up, this Leave It to Beaver, Norman Rockwell-esque. I was never hungry, never went without power, always had a bedroom. I shared it with my brothers, but that's neither here nor there. That's fine.
Yeah, roof over your head.
Right. I inherited a car when I turned 16. and it was awesome. It was an 89 Nissan Sentra that I had. I went to college. There's like really nothing to consider to make me go, man, that really sucks. Why did God do that? Right?
Yeah.
None of my family had cancer.
Yeah.
Like I had this perfect
environment, maybe
as far as struggling goes.
The basic needs,
survival, right? And then I'm in Afghanistan, and I'm running convoy security missions. I'm doing personal security detail missions. I'm managing that stuff, and you have indirect fire, which is a thing where it's really the bad guys launch a rocket over the wall and hope it hits something. And you see this stuff, and you're like, the priest, when the priest or the chaplain, before you roll on a mission and they have a little prayer huddle and the chaplain goes around and springs holy water on all the gun trucks and stuff like that, and then you go out and you get shot at anyways. And it's like, okay, well, nobody died. So do we put that in the win category?
Yeah.
Or do we get shot at? Does that make it lose? But no, it's always a win. It's like, yay.
Yeah.
Or it's
turned into a win.
One of the local nationals are driving a truck that we're escorting. They're not up armored. He takes a couple 7.62 rounds through his cab and he's wounded or dies. Do we count that in the win category? Well, we didn't actually sprinkle water on that truck.
Wow.
So
it's crazy. I can't imagine.
And then when you see firsthand the consequences of religious and ideological extremism, when you're in it and you understand the political reasons why you're being shot at, right? Afghan people just don't want us there. We're the invaders, right?
Yeah.
And when you can understand that, and you can be like, well, don't shoot at me. We won't shoot you. At that time, that was basically the rules of engagement. Yeah. If it wasn't going to threaten the lives of any service member or the cargo, unfortunately, then you just pushed. Because it is at times was a good thing. You don't want to take out one corner of a compound where there's actually families staying because there's one asshole with an AK-47 hotshot such.
Exactly.
But you realize the
Tricky.
person trying to kill you, that same guy, though, that same dude in the corner of the compound, that same dude has prayed to his God for protection and a steady hand, just like we did. And if he does get smoked, is that in the lose category for his God and a win for ours? Or is it just a win for our God? Or maybe it was all part of his God's plan for him not to be successful? It just, there's all that dissonance. Like nothing was fitting anymore in my head.
Yeah.
And when I got pushed up to Bagram and I had a lot of time on my hands, I'd reached out to my father-in-law for help because, again, there's the fear of hell. And I knew he'd read a lot of apologetic stuff, and he was pretty learned, and I knew he was honest. My opinion on that's changed a bit, but directly related to this, nothing else. It was a good guy. Yeah. And I asked him for some resources, and he sent me at least 6 books. I was trying not to exaggerate, but it was at least 6. And I couldn't tell you who they were by. I threw them away a long time ago. And I consumed all of them. I was desperate for answers. I had to figure this out.
You're getting all of this real evidence on one hand.
Correct.
And so you're like, okay, listen, I'm getting a ton of evidence and it's really going to sway me here. So do you have anything that can help make the case for the other side?
Correct.
Yeah.
And the more I read these books, the more just vapid, contradictory, plain dishonest, and at times stupid their arguments sounded. Even when I cross-reference one book to the next, like, why is water wet? And this apologist explains why water is wet. And I'm like, wait a minute. I just read Why Water Was Wet in this other book, and I go back to that book, and he has a totally different reason for why water's wet, and they're not compatible with each other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And I put those books down, and I came to it seemed to me that these apologists were just throwing darts at a wall, one, hoping they'd hit the board, and two, that they'd actually stick in the board. They didn't care where it landed.
Yeah.
They were just hoping it would make contact and stay.
It's what people do when they're losing arguments. They just throw everything out, everything at. They throw everything at it, hoping something might work, or something might
might convince the reader.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason I'd asked for help, because I've been coming to the understanding that there's no God controlling our fates. There's no guy in the sky guiding the rockets to hit or miss. There's no one keeping you safe, really, other than the soldiers with you. And there had never been anything going through my mind when in a tick, troops in combat, when in a tick, or if this did happen, when a rocket hit a building full of people, about 3 or 4 down. There was the only thing going through your mind when facing that was a singular focus on doing my job and trusting that my fellow soldiers and the people with me are doing theirs.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do your job, you let them down, and they know that, so they know you're doing your job. That's all that's going through your head.
Yeah.
And I've been told this growing up plenty of times. Like, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. And when I hear that, my first reaction is I want to punch that person in the throat. Because I was one. I was literally in a foxhole. But I was there. I was standing outside back in the day before they had the warning system tuned correctly, where you'd hear the round land about a second before the incoming alarm went off. So it'd be like, poof, and you'd be like, oh, I'm still alive. Okay. Like,
wow.
And then the alarm would go off. You're like, great, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for the alarm.
Thanks for that.
That's crazy.
But I had in that time that I was in Bagram, was over the winter. Beautiful winter, by the way. That part of the world is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, cool.
You're in the Hindu Kush Mountains, in a bowl in the Hindu Kush Mountains. I mean, it is beyond gorgeous. But I remember sitting in my cot in my little room, and I was this point DUN done. And I said out loud, "Fuck the Holy Spirit," and I meant it. I intended it for it to be unforgivable, because if the God of the Bible did in fact exist, she was a monster and deserved nothing more than to be despised. I was out. And I no longer want to go to hell anyways, because it's full of Christians. Or go to heaven anyways because it's full of Christians, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Like spending my eternity with you, not my ideal.
Yeah, I'd rather burn. But so I came home from that deployment, and sometime in there, my wife had come to the same conclusion.
Wow.
All on her own. Honestly, I've never actually asked her how she came to the conclusion. It's just she did.
Yeah. She was just there. Yeah.
And we moved from near my sister up to where we live now. And I had another deployment within the next 2 years. And I didn't give any thought to atheism. Like, I knew what atheism was at this point. I had read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins.
Mm-hmm.
I read that while I was in Afghanistan after the fact. But I didn't care. I was just like, yep, I don't believe. I'm done.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I carry on. I be the best I can be. And while I was working a job in 2017, I was working a job that once again provided opportunities to listen and think. Except this time I could have my phone out with YouTube on it. And I stumbled across the Atheist Experience. It was like a Matt Dillahunty greatest hits. And
yeah, that's cool.
my mind was blown. I had never heard anybody give coherent arguments to the stuff that I had been I'll say it this way, the stuff I knew was true growing up. I'd never heard anybody just so savagely demolish that stuff. It reminded me of my friend back after PT when he just soul punched me like, you're an idiot. I'm like, but I thought creationism was an equal theory. why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
Like that's what it was, except I had nothing invested in it anymore. So
you could just absorb it and listen to it.
I was watching that stuff, listening to it. Tracy Harris was one of my other favorite hosts.
Yeah.
And then from Matt Dillahunty, it led me to Seth Andrews and the Thinking Atheist podcast. And man, I was listening to those every chance I could. And then they introduced me as well to Aaron Ra. And then it's like, oh, science is a thing. And his whole project, and I just devoured all that stuff and had to rewatch stuff to try to learn everything I should have known before I graduated high school.
That's cool.
I was learning biology and science and all the other disciplines that go into how we got to where we are today and how things work. I was getting all of that for the very first time.
Wow.
Now, I had been taught, growing up, I think this is pretty common in fundamentalist Christian schools and whatnot. You're taught in science classes how stuff worked, not why it worked.
Yeah.
So if they taught us why stuff worked, it would have undermined the entire creation nonsense. And the answers to the curious why questions were always something along the lines of because God's amazing, or because God created that way, or some irreducible complexity nonsense.
Yeah.
So now that I'm learning why stuff is, Aaron's teaching me in this stuff why stuff is the way it is, as well as how it works, but not to a lesser extent. He's like, this is why. It just blew my mind. I got his book, The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, and that was good to have on paper, because not only does he lays out in each chapter one of the major lies that creationism goes, but then he gives the why it's a lie and what the real answer is. And then provides all the resources you could ever read.
That's cool.
To check his citations and to study further. I'd also discovered the Non Sequitur Show. Rest
heard
in
about
peace
that one.
For all those who remember the glory days.
Oh.
It's gone defunct. But those two hosts, it kind of became a debate show. And Aaron Ra was one of the early big guests that really kicked the show off. I started watching to it like almost right after it came out. But they provided guests and experts that had resources that you could look up and study. Like they'd bring on, they'd have a young Earth creationist proponent, then they bring on a PhD who had a book that dealt specifically with what, the book dealt with what they were debating in the context of that long form debate.
Wow.
And it wasn't a pure academic debate. Like they would have time sections, and then it would go into like a free for all, where the two hosts would kind of try to keep them, equal time sort of idea.
Yeah.
Kent Hovind went on that show a few times. You know who Kent Hovind is?
No.
So I think his theme park is like, I don't know what it is. Kent Hovind is
he
he's
part
the
of the
one
Answers
who
in
put
Genesis
forth
stuff?
No, he's Answers in Genesis thinks he's crazy. All right.
Okay.
He's the one who put forth the idea or tried to make more popular the idea that the reason why so much rain is able to fall from the sky and because it never rained prior to the flood was because it's what he refers to, what he thinks the biblical firmament was an ice sphere around the earth.
Okay, so he's got some crazy ideas. Yeah. Cuckoo.
But that helped as well. I wanted to mention Non Sequitur Show for anybody who has fond memories of that.
Yeah, that's cool.
But I then started searching and reading and watching all the counter apologetics I could find. I mean, Apologia, Shannon Q, Steve McRae, Prophet of Zod, Dark Matter, Holy Kool-Aid, Dr. Josh, Scholar Fiction, and all these guys. And the thing they taught me the most, other than getting me familiar with undoing all of that indoctrination in my head, was how to follow sources.
Okay, cool.
Read the citations, read the sources. And Shannon Q says her thing is she is advocate for your own understanding, or advocate for your own education. And I've learned never to accept something because somebody in authority said it. You don't take people at their word. You have to have a necessity because it's life.
Yeah.
But you got to do your own research and find out if what they said can be demonstrated. And honestly, a lot of pain and misunderstanding could have been avoided if I'd known about those standards, those rigorous standards, and applied them to what I've been taught as a child.
Yeah. The kind of thinking was kept from you.
Yeah.
When you were growing up.
The more I learned, the more I realized how little I know.
And how long ago was it that you were discovering all of these resources?
So it would have been 2017.
Okay. Yeah. So about 4 years ago.
About 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's cool.
I just so it's probably been 7-8 years since I've been an atheist, thereabouts.
Yeah, because you deconverted basically in when you were in Afghanistan in like 2013,
right.
2014.
Yep.
Ish, and then and then you start discovering some of these resources that kind of bolster your understanding of the world, and you start getting confirmation that the things that you're starting to believe or stop. Yeah, the things you're starting to believe now are in fact evidence-based, and you can trust them, and you start feeling good about that.
I'm not sure I searched the stuff out with this intent, but what the intent ended up being was I now have to develop my own worldview. I don't have to, but I should.
Yeah, we all
I should have a reason for why I think something. I should understand biological evolution, so that I've good cause to call young Earth creation stupid.
Yeah, you could back it up. Yeah,
right. And it was also learn how to critically think, because before everything was dictated. This is what you think. This is how you think. This is this is your opinion. And now it's like, I have to figure out how to take to the best knowledge that I have, or the most information I have, and form an opinion on something. And by the way, I'm allowed to be honest and admit when I don't know something. I'm allowed to change my mind if I get better information.
That's cool.
I learned how to live in the gray. I used that phrase earlier, but I learned how to live in the gray. And for me, that means I have to think and consider a decision path and determine a best course of action. Not an action that has been dictated regardless of the consequences. I have to think and go, what are the consequences of my actions if I say this, if I do this?
That's really cool.
And come up with the best solution.
Yeah.
I hadn't been able to do that before.
It's
I
a
wasn't
big deal.
supposed to.
Yeah.
I
mean,
One thing I always struggled with, and I've gotten over, which is fantastic, and it's being comfortable not knowing for certain. Because in the way I grew up, like I was, how do they put it? You know, because you know, because you know, because you know. That was something that was said in church quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not how it works.
Right,
You
right.
can't
You
just
just
have
keep
an
saying
idea
that
and
you
be
know
like,
it
I'm
doesn't.
right. No, that means lying to yourself. But now a lot of times I enjoy not having an answer. I have
Yeah, being
real quick
comfortable with
rabbit trail.
that.
I have a whole life philosophy on always being right, which is it's actually easy. It's just never being wrong. If you don't know something, you say I don't know, but I'll go find out real quick.
Yeah,
If you're not sure of something, I
yeah.
was like, oh,
Or I'll look into it.
right. And that way you don't. It alleviates a lot of challenges because if you give a wrong answer, then you have to go back and you look it up anyways. Then you have to go apologize. It's just a mess. Just say, hey man, I don't know, but give me 5 minutes, I'll find out.
Yeah, exactly.
I came to understand that academics aren't binary. They're not. We know this for a fact, or we have no idea, and God done it.
Yeah,
It's they're fluid.
yeah.
I know
This is
is
the evidence
something
we
that,
have. Yeah,
I know that's something it's obvious to anybody who didn't grow up the way I did, but the idea that there is academic debate about almost everything was wholly foreign to me. It was established. It was what I was being taught was established science, air
Yeah.
quotes, science. This is the way things are, and we know this, and there's no questioning it. And now I come to find out that yeah, there's consensus positions that you're really in the fringe if you disagree with it because there's such an overwhelming body of evidence. But anything beyond that is the reason academics exist.
yeah,
You don't write your PhD thesis on something that's already known.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. That's a good
You're
point.
you're
Yeah.
answering a question, or you're arguing against another hypothesis. They exist because we don't know something, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
And part of that growing up, if you doubted the authority, i.e. the textbooks, whatever, that was disrespect to the authority. You weren't allowed to admit to the best of our knowledge, or we don't know. Every gap if there was a gap, it was filled with magic.
Gets filled in. Yeah.
Right. God done it.
So
And then
yeah,
fun of trying to learn something, trying to figure it out.
yeah. It's fun. It's exciting. So I wanted to ask you. You went through an enormous change from being raised in a very strict Christian environment and believing yourself to be a very strong Christian for a long time. And now, of course, you did you say "fuck the Holy Spirit"? I think that was the exact quote.
That's the exact quote.
Yeah. So you've gone from strong Christian to "fuck the Holy Spirit." So you, in some ways, very different, right? But
Yes.
there's always something we look back on and say like, hey, this was really true of me. This has been true of me through the whole experience. Like a positive thing about yourself that you can look back and see in the Christian you, and you still see in yourself today. What's that for you?
I've always been curious because I hate being wrong. I'm wrong all the time, but to varying degrees. But I hate being wrong. If I'm gonna, and again, this is why with the music thing that I talked about earlier, I wanted to know where in God's word it said that I could not listen to music with electric guitars and drums. I wanted to know because in my head I could be wrong. I could be wrong in thinking that was okay. And if I saw a reason that said you are in fact in error, you can't listen to that stuff. I wanted to know so I could know it.
Yeah.
And I've always kept that. And now it translates into just instead of just blustering something that it's that way because God said it or it's in the Bible. Now it's I really don't have an answer for you. Let's enjoy this conversation. We'll admit we don't know something, but yes, I'm going to go back and research this, and we can come back and revisit it some other time.
Yeah.
So that's something that stuck with me is always being curious and wanting to know the answer.
Yeah, that's cool. So for people who are deconverting right now, who are listening to the podcast and listening to your story, what encouragement would you give those people thinking about your own experience and the difficult things you went through? What encouragement or piece of guidance would you give them?
I would say, I'm going to say it's only because it's become my biggest value, is always maintain your integrity. If you're unsure of something, that's fine. To assert something as fact that you can't demonstrate, that is lying, even if it's to yourself. Stay curious and run down that path. As long as you maintain that integrity with yourself, wherever you end up, at least you'll know you got there honestly.
Well, I want to give you a chance if you had any final thoughts or anything that maybe you didn't touch on that you wanted to mention before we wrap up today.
I don't know who said this quote, but I'll end with, the road to atheism is littered with Bibles that have been read.
That's a good quote. I like that. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
My parents still haven't read the Bible, and I asked them to over 2 years ago.
Wow. My wife and I were just talking about that with my son, I think, like either today or yesterday, about how these like Pew, my wife was looking it up, these Pew research studies that have been done that show like atheists have been, like, but the Pew research study that was done that showed that atheists were just as or more literate than Christians on basic questions about their faith.
Yeah.
About Christianity.
I skimmed an article about that, yeah.
It's just so crazy. It's like, really, Christians? Like, we're the experts on your faith? You know? It's crazy.
It's because we had to shatter everything we ever knew.
Well, we wanted to know more. We wanted to understand it.
A lot of us did.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've been taught your whole life that you're going to hell if you don't believe that Jesus is your Savior and He died on your sins, or died on the cross for your sins, and you start to be like, I'm not entirely sure. If you get to the point, which is a big step, if you get to the point where you go, I don't know if that's right. Like, that doesn't make sense anymore. Why would He save us from Himself? And He was only asleep for 3 days, and He got everything back again. Like, that's not really a sacrifice. You start thinking that to yourself, it's absolutely terrifying. So you dig in hard, and you start learning and read the apologetics. And then when you come out of it and you're like, yeah, this is all bullshit, you're now like, oh, I know a lot more than the average layperson about this stuff.
Yeah. And it's always funny when a Christian tries to guide you to a Bible verse or tries to inform you of something that you've already learned about and resolved in your own mind. You're like, okay, you just smile and like nod, like, oh yeah, all right, I'll look into that. Already have, you know.
You be polite, you know.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I appreciate you sharing your story today, and your story had so many unique things about it, and your service to the country in Afghanistan was pretty interesting to hear about, and I don't think that perspective's been mentioned, and I think that's so important. And I laughed out loud. I was trying to mention earlier that I laughed out loud when I read like the atheists in foxholes, and I want to punch them in the throat. It made me laugh. Still making me laugh, obviously. Yeah. It's so funny because it's just it's like these bullshit lines that they come up with, and it's ridiculous. But anyway, thank you for sharing your story. And I know it's going to encourage folks who hear it. And if they want to get in touch with you, is there a way for them to do that?
Yes. Now I'm going to give a warning. I generally don't check my Twitter, but I'll make sure I turn notifications on. But my username on this is at TheRedProphet89, and that's TheRedProphet 89.
All right, very good. All right, Eric. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Join us next time by following or subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.